When I began to learn about building acoustic guitars, the first thing I really focused on was the geometry. When you have electric guitars, the geometry is actually not that important. You can change the bridge height, you can use different types of hardware. If you have a bolt-on neck, you can shim the neck. But for an acoustic guitar, you actually have to have all the geometry working correctly so that the action will be correct, so it'll sound good, and so on. And one of the things that I never really thought about on an acoustic guitar was that even though they're called flat tops, they're not flat. And so here I have my Gibson acoustic, one of the first guitars I ever got, just a simple drumstick here. And so when you look at it, you can see on the sides here that they're lower than in the middle. You can kind of rock it. And then on the back, you have a similar situation. The curve is actually a bit more aggressive, to say nothing about the fact that this end is taller than this end. This curve here is really more for comfort, just the angle that you're playing. It doesn't really affect too much in terms of the construction. But the curve that goes over the top here, this is to add stiffness to the wood and also help with the projection of the sound. And so the way you build this into an acoustic guitar is by using something called a radius dish. Radius dishes are available commercially. They're $100, $120. But if you have a CNC machine already, like I do, you can use Fusion360 to actually design and make your own radius dish, which is what this video is going to be about today. I'll show you how I design my radius dish. I'll briefly go over the tool paths I did, and then you'll be able to make a radius dish for like $10, $12 worth of MDF, as opposed to spending hundreds of dollars to buy one commercially. Jumping into the Fusion360 interface, the first thing I'm going to do is to create a sphere. A radius dish is effectively a slice along a very large sphere. And so when we go into this interface, you'll have the option of where you want to put the center point and then how big the diameter of the sphere is going to be. And so in this case, I have a parameterized, and it's radius times 2, which makes the diameter. And here I'm doing a 15-foot radius. To make this a little easier to see, let's just put the grid on real quick. And so once we have our sphere in place, the next thing we want to do is to create an offset plane. And we're going to create an offset plane the radius distance from the center of the sphere. And so this is effectively making a tangent plane at the bottom, but again, just using the offset plane. Now, to make the scale easier for the screen, I'm going to hide the sphere that we have. And what we want to do next is to draw out what will become our MDF blank. And so here I just drew a center point rectangle, 2 feet on each side, which is usually enough to do an acoustic guitar. And this step leaves us with our MDF blank drawing tangent to the sphere at the bottom. Next, I extrude the MDF blank sketch to create the dimensions of my MDF blank. And here I'm doing this in half because that's what's going to fit on my CNC machine. Of course, if you had a larger machine, you could do both at the same time. The only fiddly bit here is that because we're going to extrude in 2 dimensions, I've created some parameters here to try and do what the offset of the sphere is going to be into the MDF. So if I'm using 3/4 inch MDF, I played with the settings until I found that 0.38 was the right offset for the next operation we're going to do. And so it's really hard to see, but our little block here is at the bottom of the sphere, and it actually it is indented into the sphere a little bit, which will make a lot more sense after the next step. With both our sphere and our MDF blank, we can now use the combine functionality to create the piece that we need. You can see under the operations tab, there's a separate section that's called cut. And so even though the tool is called combine, you can combine, you can cut, or then you could do the union. And so when you do this, you can see that you end up getting that partial piece of sphere, cut out from the MDF blank. And just to bring the intuition back about what those parameters were doing, if you think about having the sphere and either pushing it further down into the MDF or moving the MDF further away, the portion of the sphere that's actually contained is going to change. And so if you raise the sphere up, less of it would intersect with the MDF, and if you increase it, more of it will go down. And so I just played with this here and found that 0.38 was the right offset. But if you were to change the radius of the sphere or change the thickness of your MDF, you might use a different number. I won't spend too much time on the cam side of things, since it's a function of the machine and the mills that you're using. I'm using a Shapeoko 4XL, which has an effective cutting area of 17 by 33, if I'm not mistaken, and so that's why I have to do this in half. And so, by making the MDF drawing the exact size I want to use, in my setup, I can go ahead and just pick, I want it to be exactly that size. I want to have the origin in the lower left corner. And then in terms of the tool path, there's a lot of ways to do this that I found, and it ends up being a really big trade-off between time and how smooth you want the surface to be. So I have a 3/4 inch round bit that I use for a lot of things, and in this case, that's a pretty significant diameter, and so it only takes about 30 minutes to do each side here. The trade-off that you'll see a little bit in the simulation and then in the actual video is that it does leave a lot of grooves. Now, in my situation, I was okay with that because this is meant to be a tool that I'm going to be using to sand the linings of a guitar, to use it to press the wood against it as a clamping caul. And so I wasn't worried about having it be perfectly smooth like you would if you were selling them. And now you can see the simulation's going. It's a little choppy in my computer, which is unfortunate. But essentially it's just doing a series of half circles as it cuts in. The 3D adaptive tool path is both cutting in an XY direction and a Z direction, and so it's scooping the sphere out of the MDF. And here's what that actually looked like, sped up considerably. Just for completeness sake, because I did it in two halves, I need to glue them together. MDF is pretty easy to work with, and I'm just using plain old tight bond here. Using my advanced tooling of a bare finger to just smooth out the glue, and then a little bit of clamping, and that's it. You get your radius dish for whatever the cost of an 1/8 sheet of MDF is, which if you're buying a whole sheet is maybe $80 or less now, and so for $10 you can get a very effective radius dish as opposed to spending over $100.